You're listening to the Global Leadership Podcast, relevant leadership conversations for you, the curious leader. I'm Ashlyn, your producer and host. Today, let's get curious about the importance of trust in leadership.
The big shock for me when I left service and got in the civilian world is how similar they are. They're exactly the same. Except for uniforms and titles, they're exactly the same. Same problems, same issues. Same general solution, but I say general solution because it has to be customized for inside the dynamics of every organization.
We're honored to hear from retired 4-star Army General Stanley McChrystal. There are a few things you should know about him outside of his extensive and impressive military career. He's a business and leadership expert. His company, McChrystal Group, focuses on helping businesses build stronger teams. He's a senior fellow at Yale University, a best-selling author, and just all-around inspiring person. In this episode, General McChrystal talks with Emmy award-winning journalist Paula Faris about his personal leadership style, building trust, and the role of curiosity. So let's get curious. Here's General McChrystal and Paula Faris.
I have to call you General. I know you want me to call you Stan, but...
When someone refers to the general, I look around for my father. So
Okay. Before we even begin, I just want to say thank you for your 34 years of service to our country.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
In this podcast, we really like to dig into curious, growth-minded leaders. You are one of those. You check all of those boxes. You're sitting in a room here at the Global Leadership Summit in Chicago, and there are so many that just want to tap your ear on your leadership styles. They're eating lunch, though. Can I ask you, I know you're a very self-disciplined person. You're disciplined. You work out every day. You run, I think, 7 or 8 miles a day. You get the same amount of sleep every night, but I think you only eat 1 meal a day?
That's correct.
Okay, is this making you hungry, being in a room of people eating lunch right now?
Yeah, I want to gnaw my forearm, actually.
So do you only eat 1 meal a day?
I do.
Is this something new in your life? Or?
No, I've been doing it for about 40 years.
Oh, my word.
And everybody
You're
thinks
the original intermittent faster is what you are.
And, people think it's some Zen thing. No, when I was a lieutenant, I thought I was getting fat. So I said, okay, I just won't eat until dinner. And the problem is my dinners sometimes are biblical, okay. Anything I can reach,
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I think a habit that works for me. And if I'm too old, if I change suddenly, it could hurt me.
Yeah, so you never break your fast, so not until dinner every night.
I mean, every once in a while, if I'm at a business lunch or something, you don't want to be rude, I'll do it, but no.
Okay. That's actually very admirable. Very admirable. I can't fast more than 8 hours, and that's when I'm sleeping. So, so I want to talk about the role of curiosity and growth in your leadership. Why do you think it's important for leaders to be both curious and growth-minded?
Yeah, I'm going to put it in my personal experience, which is that as a soldier. The first thing about curiosity is you need to know what's going on. Mm-hmm. If you start with an assumption that I figured it out, in warfare, you are almost always incorrect. And when you are surprised, that's a bad, bad thing.
Right.
And so the best leaders have this constant curiosity, not just about what the enemy's doing or the situation, but about your own organization. How's it operating? What are people thinking? And so the best commanders I've ever seen, they're just question machines. And they're constantly pinging the organization on how they can best get information back in and control inform everyone. Mm-hmm. The growth part also is what worked yesterday almost never works next week.
Why is that?
Well, because things change. And that's very upsetting, too. I was trained as a civil engineer, so the idea that the answer changes is deeply upsetting.
2 + 2 should always equal 4.
That's exactly right.
Except when it's 5.
But that's not the way it is. What happens is warfare changes, situations change. So if you go in with what Napoleon did or what Dwight Eisenhower did with this historical solution, it's going to be incorrect for the context in which you're in. So you need to be curious enough to understand the context, adaptable enough to figure out what works. Years ago, I was taught if it's stupid and it works, it ain't stupid. And
can you say that again?
Yeah.
Wait.
And so that idea of understanding that you need to grow into something different all the time is critical.
Yeah. You have redefined leadership in one of your most recent books called Leaders. You revised how you define leadership. Why did you do that, and what is your new definition of leadership?
Yeah, it's great. If you look up leadership definitions, there are like 260 of them, so you just pick whatever you want. But I grew up with the great woman or great man theory, and that's the idea that there are a certain number of people in our society who sort of bend history to them. We build statues to them, we name things after them, and we define periods in our history. What happens, though, is if you get closer to those people, they're invariably human. They've got foibles, they make mistakes, they're not perfect, and that's disappointing to us. Sometimes we decide, no, we love that person, and now we find out something about them. We hate that person. We got to get back into something realistic because they are people. I went through that journey with Robert E. Lee, who had been my hero. But now what I think is the reality is leadership is not a thing you have. You aren't born with it. Nobody gives you a pile of leadership to carry around in your pockets. It's this almost interaction between leaders and the people that they lead, and followers may be a pejorative word, it might be partners, and then the context of the moment. And the interaction of those three factors produce whether it's effective. It's one of the reasons why it's very hard to take a successful leader from one situation, pick them up and parachute them in another, and expect the same kind of outcome. If you do that with CEOs, statistically you find you get a worse outcome than if you promote from inside the company. And I know that's true with soldiers and whatnot. So I think it's the complexity of leadership that fascinates me now, the fact it's those multiple factors.
Yeah, I'm so excited to really dig in and see how these lessons that you learned in the military space can really transfer to the civilian space and the business space. But you're a person of growth. You are a self-proclaimed introvert, which I find hard to believe, considering what you've done for so long and the fact that you're on stage and you're speaking in front of thousands of people and you teach classes, you're a professor. But how have you been able to step outside of yourself and outside of your comfort zone, considering an introvert, that's really where you're most comfortable?
Yeah, I am really introverted. In fact, when they do a lot of psychological tests in special operations, they were giving me my back brief. They go, "You're very introverted." And I say, "Yeah, but I'll grow out of that." And they say, "No, that's not the way it works. You become more of whatever you are the older you get, but you do develop some coping mechanisms." So, to be honest, if I was to do something terrible and be thrown in the equivalent of prison, it would be a big cocktail party. And I would have to make small talk, forever, because I just hate that environment. But what I have learned is, as a leader, you have a responsibility. And that responsibility, if you're in a room of young soldiers, they're not comfortable coming up to a 4-star general and just slapping you on the back. You've got to reach out to them. You've got to approach them. You've got to talk. You have a responsibility to establish that. And so that helps me a lot. When I think it's something I should do, it helps me overcome my natural fear of doing it.
Right. Do we have any introverts in the room? Anybody want to? The introverts are like, I'm not raising my hand. Too nervous to do that. What are some of your best coping mechanisms? Because, here you are thrust in this position, and when you're taking these tests, they're like, you're an introvert. You say, I'll grow out of it. You haven't grown out of it. So how have you coped? You just gave us a couple of mechanisms, but maybe some of your go-tos.
First is my calendar. We talked about that I am relatively disciplined. I run my life by my calendar, which is run by Cheryl Ann Anderson, and I've been working together for years. And what I found is if I put it on the calendar, I do it, even if I don't want to do it. And so if I need to talk or have a painful conversation, if I put it and schedule it, I get mentally ready and I follow through. If I don't, and I say, well, I'll just find white space and do that, I'll find an excuse to not do it. So that's one of the key things that helps me. The second is I have a group of people with whom I'm very close, and it's a diverse collection of people, but I will use them to sort of buoy my confidence at times. If I'm feeling uncertain about things, I'll reach out to them, and just the interaction will energize me. I've got a guy who used to be number 3 in the CIA we're very close to, and he and I will just text every day. But when I feel absolute worst, I'll text him and I'll just get this sort of motivational, it's a joke or something like that. And when I'm doing lousy stuff, it reminds me, it's sort of the somebody loves me.
What about those leaders who think, this is how I was born, this is how I was created, don't try to make me something I'm not? it's up to us as leaders to want to grow outside of our comfort zones, correct?
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, I don't think you can be someone you're not. I don't think you can recreate yourself to be like somebody you saw. My father used to tell me that after World War II, there were a bunch of people other generals trying to act like George Patton. And none of them were Patton, so it didn't work. So I don't think you can be something different, but at the same time, you have to be what your followers need.
Right.
You can't just say, this is where I am, like it. You've got to decide what does the organization and the people need, and you got to try as best you can to be that.
We'll be right back. You're listening to a conversation that took place backstage during our premier leadership event, the Global Leadership Summit. If you're enjoying this conversation, there is so much more for you. In fact, you can get 1-year access to all 16 faculty talks, interviews, and special moments from the 2021 Global Leadership Summit, including General Stanley McChrystal's powerful keynote on taking risk. How? Simply go to globalleadership.org/on-demand to purchase your 1-year access. Not only does GLS On Demand give you access to all the talks that will support your leadership growth, you'll also get discussion guides, session outlines, and bonus resources, all designed and created by our teams to help you and your team get better and make a bigger impact. Again, go to globalleadership.org/on-demand to learn more. We're also going to link to it in our show notes.
You have a new book coming out called Risk, a User's Guide. So what is your take on the role of risk as a leader? I am a self-proclaimed risk-driven leader. I love to take risks. I think, the key to success is failure, and you can't go for it unless you actually take risks. So what is your take on risk within an organization and risk from a leadership perspective? And by the way, I can't wait to read the book. When's it coming out?
October 5th.
Okay, great. Put it on your calendars, everyone. On your calendars.
You're kind, because I am very much like you. For years, I was taught risk analysis, you could do mathematical models and all this stuff. And then I realized at the end of the day, we did all that, and then we really got in the room and made the decision very subjectively. And that's always been my way. And my problem is I'm willing to take much more risk than I probably ought to. So I have to surround myself with people who sort of can catch me. The thing that I've come to believe about risk is we often want to focus on a particular set of risks. There's a meteor going to hit the nation. There's going to be an economic downturn. There's going to be this. The reality is most risks we can't predict in any granularity, either timing or the exact nature of it. We have a general idea, but we don't know. Like, I just saw the hurricane report for this year, and they're predicting above average hurricane season. Great, but what do you do about that? What I think we have to do is focus inward on our organizations. Look at what makes our organization strong enough to survive. Go back to a previous crisis that you went through and say, what really got you through? It was the communication, it was the teamwork, it was all the things, your decisiveness. That's what made a difference. It wasn't because you knew that the pitcher was going to throw a curveball on the third pitch. It was that you were prepared to deal with whatever pitch came to you. And I think we need to spend a lot more time on our organizations to build that resilience in. And it's doable. There are a lot of things you can do to do it.
Why'd you write this particular book? Is this something you're really passionate about?
Well, it's funny. You talk about growth and curiosity. I wrote the leader's book because I'd gotten to a point in my life where I'd been trying to be a leader all those years, and I really didn't understand it. I was confused about leadership, which is embarrassing. Then I got to the point on risk, and I said, well, I was dealing with risk, and people said, you took all these great risks. I said, yeah, but I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And so I wanted to delve in and say, one, why did I do it that way? Why did our organizations do it that way? Why don't we do it better? And so it was a chance to sort of put my arm and mind around it and learn.
How do you think leaders in this room and those listening can reimagine risk and risk-taking within their organization? My sister and her husband are not risk takers, and they like to say that I'm fire, then aim, then ready, instead of ready, aim, fire. So I kind of do things backwards, but I don't think about it enough. I just like to go for it, and I feel like part of the success is the failure along the way. But how can you inspire those listening, those in this room, to reimagine the role of risk within the organization, within their own leadership?
Yeah, I would say that if you think about risk as, on an X and Y axis, and it's the probability of something happening, the consequences, if it's pretty high consequences and pretty high probability, you're very worried about it. I would think about it slightly differently. Think about it as an equation between the threats that are out there to us and our vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. If there were no threats, it wouldn't matter if we had vulnerabilities, because nothing to worry about. But we can't get to no threats. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, what do we control? We control our vulnerabilities. We control how strong we are. It's kind of like an athlete. If they get themselves in good physical condition, if they learn the sport, if they become adaptable, they're going to be able to respond to what happens no matter what it is. So I would say, if we think about risk that way, you're never even going to be able to calculate risk perfectly. Mm-hmm. I was on the board of Deutsche Bank for several years, and we did all of these models to determine risk. If the interest rates go up and down, and they were just mind-boggling. And then on the right-hand side, we listed other risks: loss of talent, reputational loss. Those were all the existential threats to the bank. Mm-hmm. And what we did was we agonized over these things, and we looked at those and go, yeah, it'd be bad if those happened. Yep. But those are the ones we actually had to worry about, and we should have been preparing the organization to deal with.
Yeah, and sometimes we can get paralysis by analysis, just spinning the wheels. Okay, so I've learned more probably through my failures and my flaws than I have my successes. When you look back at your leadership, and you were in command for so long, served 35 years. When you look back at your leadership, what was one of the lower points for you, and what did you learn from it? Because I'm big on learning. I don't think it's a mistake as long as you learn from it. I call it a success, because those are the greatest growth moments for me, at least in my personal life and my career.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You always learn more from your failures because there is a reason to study it. We always say that if you go into war against a foe that lost the last war, you got problems. Mm-hmm. Because they probably went to school on what went wrong, and they did it. If they didn't, they're stupid. I had a number of periods in my career we made big mistakes, but when I was a young officer, a company commander, I was this mechanized company commander, and I didn't understand how to maneuver my organization. And that's sort of basic. And so I went into this training fight and got crushed, humiliatingly crushed, not just beaten a little bit, but humiliatingly crushed. And there were two things I learned. First, my battalion commander came to me, and he was a demanding guy. And I started to do a mea culpa and apologize to him. And he says, "I thought you did great." And I remember going, "We talking about the same battle?" And what he understood at that moment was I already knew I'd screwed up. He didn't have to tell me that. And what he had to remind me was I wasn't a screw up. I had screwed up, and
that's good.
Pick up and learn from it, and you got to get back on a horse and move. And that was a good reminder to me. And if you don't learn from every time you have a problem, the other thing I would throw is when you have great success, most organizations and people won't study it hard enough. When we studied for one of the books we wrote, we found out that something like 95% of all commercial airline flights have a potentially fatal flaw in the aircraft. They just don't happen to come to fruition. But as long as nothing bad happens, we tend to say, yep, we must have done it about right. You can do it completely wrong and get a good outcome. And we need to be careful we don't draw the wrong conclusions. Sometimes it's luck.
General has a great point. Sometimes it is luck. But how can you learn from success? Enter Rasmus Ankerson. He's an expert on performance development and led two of the world's most innovative and successful football clubs. Take a listen.
The questions leaders should ask themselves in times of success are questions like, are we actually that successful? What is the cause of our success? Is it luck? Is it skill? How big of a factor is luck in our success? They should ask themselves if we were the most critical skeptic, what questions would we ask ourselves? It's also about saying, if we were our worst competitor, how would we beat ourselves? You need to force yourself to look at yourself from the outside in and ask those questions.
you were able to transform JSOC, the Joint Special Forces Operations Command, into the organization that killed the two most notorious terrorists of the 21st century, Osama bin Laden and Zarqawi. But then in Iraq, you encountered some problems with siloing information. I mean, there's like 1,000 intelligence agencies. We have 18 intelligence agencies, government agencies. So when you have so many different agencies holding on to that information, how were you able to solve that problem? Because Al-Qaeda was making a move. How did you address that, knowing that there was siloing, the different agencies were holding on to their particular information, and how did you solve that?
Yeah, huge problem. Most of the people in the room know that we had all the information necessary to stop the 9/11 attacks inside the United States government. We just couldn't connect the dots. And I'm not too critical because it's hard to connect the dots across the FBI, CIA, and everything. When we went to Iraq, it was that problem in spades. And we had to use all the capacity from across the different parts of the government and bring it together. There were several problems. One, our cultures were not one to share. Two, each organization was incentivized to lead, to score the touchdown themselves, so they didn't want to give that away. Third, you didn't know people in other organizations. So if someone had asked me on 9/11 to call my best friend in the CIA, I didn't have a single name. I didn't know anybody. And yet when we're fighting the war on terror together, you need to know almost everybody. And so there are a whole bunch of things that are not evil in intent, but they build up this habit of not cooperating and not sharing. So what we did in JSOC basically is we built a big tent equivalent, and we invited all those elements in to share, and of course they didn't immediately do that.
I'm sure there was a lot. People were digging in their heels at first.
I mean, it was vicious. When we had the CIA in there, and we're doing it, and then I invited the FBI to join, and when the FBI said yes, I told everybody they're coming. The CIA says we're leaving. We're pulling out. We don't trust them. You know,
don't trust them.
I mean, you're flummoxed. But what we had to do was, it was patient. It was over years. I was there 5 years. And you first have to share more yourself. You have to model the behavior you want.
That's good.
You have to incentivize them to do it. You have to be patient when it takes some of them a long time to start to come around. And then when they start to see they're getting a payoff for it, as we started to be more and more successful, it got easier because everybody wanted to be part of a task force that was doing a lot. If we could have never done this in peacetime, because you couldn't have convinced people of the burning platform, or you wouldn't have the constant feedback. And that's the danger, because if you can't do it in peacetime,
right. Couldn't have convinced
you're not
them
ready for war.
Yeah, you couldn't have convinced them that it was necessary. It sounds like what you learned and what you implemented, you could easily implement that into the business world, into the civilian world, if people are struggling with that right now. Like, what would you tell leaders out there that are listening to this, and same thing happened, maybe not on the magnitude of 18 different intelligence agencies withholding information in the CIA, but what could you tell business leaders, anyone listening, if they are struggling within their own company, the siloing of information, the mistrust, the distrust, like, how can they take steps?
Yeah, I start by saying, people hear a military person talking and they go, well, that's interesting, but I'm in the civilian world. The big shock for me when I left service and got in the civilian world is how similar they are. They're exactly the same. Except for uniforms and titles, they're exactly the same. Same problems, same issues. Same general solution, but I say general solution because it has to be customized for inside the dynamics of every organization. There's not just a cookie cutter list that you do this. Understand the general idea of you're trying to get people aligned with trust, and that takes requirement to build it, and a common purpose for this overall effort. Start to share information like you've never shared it before. It's a lagging thing because it takes a while of sharing before you start to see that positive. And then push down decision making, we call it empowered execution. If you do those over time, and again it takes time, you'll start after a while to see traction and see better. And then I used to tell people, I don't care what your batting average is, I only care what's on the scoreboard. So stop worrying about your performance and start thinking about whether we're winning and losing.
That's really good. Stop looking at the individual stats. Look at the cumulative team stats. That's so good. I think we're almost done here. Can we do a quick lightning round with you before we let you go, General? Or should I say Stan? I still can't get used to calling you Stan. Okay,
I've
lightning
been called
round.
worse.
I'm not going to go there. This is a lightning round, which means we have to go quick. All right? So when did you first realize you were a leader?
I think I was about a captain, and I suddenly realized that I loved doing it.
All right. One productivity tool that you use every day. I think we know the answer to this.
It's the calendar. Do it in detail and live it. I mean, you look at my calendar now, you know when I take a shower.
Digital or written?
Oh, digital.
Okay. You're on a deserted island. What's your one leadership resource?
Wow. I want to say one of my books, but you know.
Risk, the new one on risk. How about that?
Yeah, it would be a book.
Okay.
I don't have a particular one, but it would be a historical book.
All right. What leader from world history, alive or not, would you like to have dinner with?
Well, Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
I mean, it's his complex problem was just amazing.
One problem that you would like to change?
Income inequality.
All right. And what are you curious about?
To be honest, right now, how our economy works. I'm not sure we know how it works anymore. It's always been complicated, but I think there are things going on that we don't appreciate. I mean, I don't pretend that I would ever understand it, but I'd like to understand what's happening and why we can't.
I'm sensing another literary wonder coming out, another book about the economy. No?
Yeah, the economy for dummies, me.
All right, General McChrystal, it has been such a pleasure. Everyone, would you give him a round of applause?
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, General.
We're all on a leadership journey. We're so thankful for General McChrystal being so open with us about his learnings. We also love hearing from you, our audience, about your journeys. Go to our show notes to read stories from a healthcare leader, a business leader, and a ministry leader about their leadership journey of building trust and curiosity. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to share, rate, and subscribe. Leave us some comments. Let us know about the journey that you're on. Until next time, stay curious, my friends.